John, I can't believe we get to do this. I get
know.
to see you in your real life self.
Yes, and me to see you.
Do you mind taking me back to the ur source, the beginning of John? Because you are this combination of professions that I find deeply compelling. You're a three-in-one, a real Trinitarian setup.
That's right. So how did I become who I am?
Yeah, you started one thing and then became another.
I did. Well, I started life as a van driver.
Did you really?
I did. And I really liked that, because it was probably the best job I ever had, because you've no responsibility. You just pick up your stuff and then drive around the northeast of Scotland, go back home. You have to think about anything. It's great. But maybe I didn't want to do that forever, but it was fun. Anyway, so I began my professional career as a nurse. So I trained originally in mental health, and I worked in psychiatry for a number of years, and then I retrained in the area of intellectual disability, which then was mental deficiency, then became mental handicap, then became learning disability. It's very significant that these names change all the time according to cultural expectations. But anyway, now it's intellectual disability. And I worked for a total of probably 16 years in there. And then I decided I wanted to train for the Church of Scotland ministry, because I thought I was going to be a hospital chaplain. Yeah, because my father was a hospital chaplain. That's not to say that hospital chaplaincy is genetic. It just happens to be that it was always there. It seemed like a natural thing to do, to move from a healthcare background into chaplaincy. And I did work in chaplaincy for a while, but as soon as I got into the university, for whatever reason, I knew that I wanted to teach practical theology. It just grasped me straight away, but I'm not quite sure why, but it just did. You find your vocation sometimes, and that's it. And along the way, I became ordained in the Church of Scotland, and I worked as a mental health chaplain for a number of years as well, alongside of my PhD. And then I became me, whatever that actually means.
You're like, and that was pretty much the three tributaries of me.
Exactly.
To be a nurse and to be a theologian and to be a pastor. I mean, one of the things that strikes me, especially about meeting you in real life, is you understand the deep art of presence. I always notice I always kind of know when I meet a person who's been a nurse or is a nurse, because they have a way of standing there and not shirking from, I guess, the awkwardness of suffering. Because you obviously are someone who leans in.
But I suppose you do learn that, really, particularly because of the kind of career route, if you like, or vocational route I have. So when you're with people, particularly with people with intellectual disabilities, profound intellectual disabilities, if you're not there, you're really not there, because the only way that you can be with somebody is by being present, in that sense. And to be present means that you have to put to one side a lot of the cultural assumptions you have, because look, the way in which we normally make sense of one another as human beings, it's through a process of mind reading, right? Yeah. So I'm looking at you, right? And I'm kind of trying to work out how you're thinking. You've got a fairly friendly face on just now. You've got a very friendly face, full stop.
I have a very little house on the prairie set up.
That's right. So I think, well, maybe she likes me. At least she's not going to be hostile towards me. And so I make that decision, then you communicate accordingly. But when you're with people who have difficulties in communication, that goes out the window. So how do you make sense of somebody that has no words, and that you really can't mind read in that sense? And so you have to learn just to be, that you don't do anything, just be there. And I suppose that's part of your formation as a nurse, and maybe as a chaplain as well, that you just learn to be where you are. Yeah.
I have a lot of questions about how we create the sense that other people belong where they are, and you've had formation in two very distinct institutions that are supposed to create it just naturally. That maybe we could start with the church. The church is, is inherently designed not to kick people out. It is meant to be an inside-out institution in which the very weak among us, Scripture is very clear on who we are meant to care for.
That's right.
The fatherless, the imprisoned, How has the church been a complicated place of belonging, especially for people with intellectual disabilities?
Well, first of all, I completely agree with you that in principle that's the way it should be. And sometimes it is that way. But the problem is that the church, like society, has a particular value that it places on intellectual activity.
Yes.
Right. So if you meet somebody for the first time, the chances are you'll ask them what you do.
Yeah.
And then you'll put them in a hierarchy. And normally it would be a brain surgeon up here, and normally it would be somebody that doesn't think down here. Because culturally, that's the way we prioritize things. So we're fascinated by intellect and reason. So therefore, when you encounter people who don't have the ability to communicate or to be in that way, then it's a problem for you. Because culturally, we think that's the essence of being a human being.
Yeah.
Now, if you transfer that into a theological context where you begin to say things like, you have to know this in order to be saved, then what happens to people that can never know things? Or worse, or not worse, but what happens to people who knew things and then have forgotten things? And so that kind of intellectual rationale for the nature of faith is highly problematic for people with intellectual disabilities, but also highly problematic for people with dementia, for example, who are beginning to lose these things. And so whilst the church as a community of the Friends of Jesus should be a welcoming place in the way that you describe it, sometimes the way in which we construct our theological understandings, even though something as important as salvation, i.e. being with Jesus, is a blockage. I know you might not articulate it in that way, but in your mind you may well, many people think it in that way. And it comes to fruition when people are, for example, not allowed to take part in the sacraments or not allowed to be baptized and these kind of things. So it can be tricky.
Profession of faith
Correct.
is such a big part. Or
Exactly.
I have thought about, so you've written so many beautiful books, and I have cherished the crap out of them, and I promise I always credit you.
I have never heard that expression before. That's great. I'm going to take that home.
But I find myself arguing. I was like, as my friend John says, I had this argument maybe a month ago. It was with a very high capacity government official, and he was describing his great fear of dementia and losing the ability to tell his own story. And he immediately said, well, I would, and then these were like very intense desires to take back control over what end of life would look like for himself because he was so scared. And I was like, as my friend John says, but the argument that I thought was so beautiful about whether primarily as a Christian or as a human being, our fundamental job is to articulate our stories in a convincing way. And then you have this lovely account of God as the one who holds our story for us. God is the one who, as he gathers us to him, is like, shh,
That's right.
I am holding all things.
Exactly.
I find that so deeply compelling.
Yeah.
I mean, for the last, not just for the, what do they call it, dotage, like the more puttering years, but for anyone who worries that they lose, that in losing the narrative that we fully lose ourselves.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And one of the interesting things about the way in which the writer to the Hebrews describes faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you cannot see. Now, that's a very different understanding of faith than the way that we culturally oftentimes think about that. And I think that's important because for two reasons. One, in relation to memory is pretty fickle, right? So I'm thinking, I was a latecomer to the faith. I was in my 20s when I became a Christian. And right up to then I thought, you're quite a decent guy. You live a pretty good life. And then suddenly I discover I'm a horrible sinner and fear of condemnation. And so everything I thought I knew about myself turns out not to be the case. And memory functions like that. Your memory is always very selective. And if it's what you remember about yourself that counts, then you're in big trouble. Because you actually don't remember what you think you remember. And so for me, the important thing is to take seriously what Paul says. You find your identity in Christ. It's not, you don't find your identity in your neurology or in the things that you can or cannot do. You find your identity in Christ, and your identity in Christ is hidden, as Paul says in Colossians. So you never really know who you are. And so you're not in a position to say that person's not the person they used to be, because you don't know who you are yourself, and you never will do until it's revealed to you. So it's always God's memory that's important. So we might forget certain things, other people might forget certain things, but if God remembers us, then we're held in the safety of that. And that's really important from a pastoral point of view, because if faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you cannot see, then that's how I have to look at you.
Yeah.
So you may have all sorts of brain damage, you may be struggling to do all sorts of things, but if I'm looking at you with faithful eyes, being sure of what I hope for and certain of what I cannot see, then that completely transforms my understanding of who you are and how I should respond to you. So the theology and the practice around that are just profoundly important.
John, I think that I got my theology of hope from you, from a book. I really, when people say, well, then what is hope? Because I usually have a life I can't fix. And in the certainty paradigms, then I'm supposed to produce a certain kind of, I should die very politely in faith. I mean, just sure of so many things. And I always find myself saying, and I'm almost positive it's from you, I say like, hope is a long story, but it's the story God's telling us about us.
Right.
I mean, and it's not contingent then on my ability to,
Yeah.
certainly not my ability to control.
Yeah.
And I love that it extends then to even our ability to do the thing which we imagine self-expression does, which is that each of us tell the good story.
Yeah, exactly. You didn't get that from me, but I'm happy to take the glory.
Pretty sure I did.
Did you? I mean, it sounds like something I would say.
It is something you would say.
But I'm getting old, I don't remember everything.
You're like, that's what happens when you write a lot of books. It's probably somewhere near the back.
Exactly.
Suffering or undoing or a feeling of incompleteness, like not the, for some reason I always think of like businessman rushing off to important job, eating an artisanal salad, like that is our image of a fully formed heroic individual, at least in North America. If we're not that self, how can the church create a generous place of belonging for all those of us who will not bring in that kind of heroic individual?
Yeah. Well, I think that the place to begin is with the relationship of friendship. Because I think, one of the most radical moments in John's gospel is when Jesus says, I no longer call you servants, I call you friends, right? And so God, who creates the universe, who comes into the world, calls his creatures friends. I don't know if we take that seriously enough. Right?
You're like, no, friends with the person said, I'm trying not to fall into modalism here, but like the savior of the world, but like buddies.
Meet my mate, God.
Yeah, he saved the world. It's no big deal.
My daughter would love that. I'm going to take that. So the church then it becomes to be a disciple is to become a friend of Jesus. The church becomes a community of friends. But then you look at the friendships of Jesus, and they're really different. Like so, my Facebook friends, of whom I have many, of whom I know
if you know that, but I'm really popular on Facebook.
I can prove it. Screenshot. The problem with Facebook friends is you can get rid of them very easily.
Yeah.
And most of your Facebook friends are very similar to yourself. And so the people that are not like yourself, just get rid of them. So you've got this lovely cluster of people who just look like you. It's like looking in the mirror. And we kind of do that in real life as well. Yeah. The thing that's startling about the friendships of Jesus is that they are not marked by the principle of like attracts like, but by the principle of grace. That like attracts those people whom society says are unlike you, so tax collectors, sinners, prostitutes. Not reformed tax collectors, sinners and prostitutes, but people who are just doing their thing. And it's through that friendship that they begin to encounter who Jesus is. And I think that's the heart of belonging, recognizing that we are, as a church, the community of the friends of Jesus, and that Christ-like friendship doesn't look like the kind of friendships we're used to. Yeah. And that's the radical edge, I think, in principle that we have to offer to the world in terms of belonging, because that's when people really can find a space through that kind of relationship.
Yeah. We, when you describe that kind of unlikeness and the way that it forces us to belong to each other, thinking of my friend Roger, who passed away last month. He was the librarian here at the
Oh,
Divinity
was he?
School. And Roger and I didn't have that much in common. He was a librarian and liked being a librarian. I liked running around and talking about American religion, and we had very little to chat about, except that Roger showed up for every small act of picking me up from the airport when I needed to go to the hospital, making sure the sign-up sheet for food that I didn't say that I needed but definitely needed was filled in, and the unlikeness that became the most stable part of a very unstable time is I couldn't have gotten that if I hadn't been part of a church that was committed to me in a way that like guy at the grocery store was never going to be committed to me. He like made some kind of weird covenantal promise at the beginning of time to actually care about my stupid problem. But like when we belong to each other, it's a lot of work. It's sort of horrible.
It's sort of horrible. But there is great power in small things, isn't there? Like, I think that transformation and change isn't necessarily a huge thing. I mean, we're not called to transform the world, that's God's job, but we are called to transform ourselves. And oftentimes transformation comes through these small gestures of hope that enable us to find belonging. So I think that's a great example.
So nice. The other institution that is near and dear to you, and me by extension, less dear to me, is the hospital. And I wondered if we could talk about the healthcare institutions as another place that that people who are in need are supposed to belong. It is a strange place to be vulnerable, though. What is it, do you think, about the way that we imagine disease or illness, or just the way hospitals are set up, that it is almost hard to imagine walking in there in a posture of vulnerability?
Well, I think at least part of the issue is because hospitals are set up to fix things and to solve problems. And I don't mean that necessarily, because everybody wants
that.
Exactly.
But
if the primary focus of my relationship with you is just to fix a part of you, then that's the part I'll look at you. So I'm not going to be particularly interested in what's going on elsewhere in your life. I'm focusing on there. So the specialisms that's within medicine is necessary. Of course it's necessary. You want experts to be expert in different parts of your body. But the danger then is that you actually lose the big picture in terms of the way that you think about people when you encounter them. And so you're so busy thinking about the small parts that you miss the large part. But the whole of a health service, if I think about the National Health Service in the United Kingdom, it's kind of set up to be generic. And so you can even see that in relation to the way in which spirituality works itself out. So spirituality is roughly defined as a search for meaning and purpose and value and hope, and for some people, God. Now, why is that? Well, it's because there's no room for particularity in a generic healthcare system. So you can't have a spirituality that works for only one person. It has to work for everybody. You can't have an antibiotic that only works for one person. It has to work for everybody.
Totally.
And so even something like spirituality, which in principle should be pushing into the depths of your meaning and purpose and the things, doesn't really function that way, because the institution says, you can ask this question, but not this question. And so there is that kind of thinness in the way that people become in terms of the way that we describe and interact with them, which is called by that, at least partly by that inherent spirituality within the system, but also by that tendency to break things down and to focus on bits rather than wholes. And so if you come in and say,
focus on the bits rather than the wholes. That's exactly right.
So if you come in and say, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable today because something happened at home, people, so what?
That's not actually on the pain scale. So if you could make it a 1 through 10 number, that'd be great.
I don't mean people do it deliberately, but you can get a culture where that becomes the norm, and that makes it very difficult to become vulnerable in that situation. Because you're uncertain about what kind of response you get.
I used to dress up like I was going for a job interview every time, because that is the person who was taken seriously. That's the person who I could tell only later that I was auditioning for care, because it had gone so badly for so long. But I still really struggled not to find like the nearest structured blazer if I'm anywhere near a hospital. Because it did seem to, profession by profession, there was a different sense of whether the whole, like I'm obviously a huge fan of nurses.
Yes.
But the ability to contextualize your diagnosis and your care and your treatment seems like that is work that is falls to some people and not others, I suppose.
Yeah, it's tricky because even within nursing, there's a difference between the context you're nursing in. So my wife's a nurse, right? Yeah. So she's a registered general nurse, or as she would put it, a real nurse, right? And I was a mental health nurse. And the difference between the two of us is that I would sit and speak to people all day long, and she would get things done. And that's kind of true, like. But within mental health, you have to look at the whole person, because the whole person is what is brought to you, unless you get caught up in diagnosis and that allows you to lose your focus. So that context really opens itself up to presence and to belonging and to a holistic understanding. Whereas if you're in a busy acute ward where you have a series of tasks to do, it's not so easy to be to create a space of belonging. Even if that space is you, it's just not so straightforward.
Do you think I just remember we talked to Victoria Sweet, her lovely book on slow and fast medicine. Oh, yes. Do you think, I'm just thinking of you have good arguments about speed, about the speed at which love can operate. Yes. I wondered if you wouldn't mind first telling me a bit about that, and second, whether you think maybe the speed of love is just perhaps harder to duplicate in a healthcare scenario.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about that recently. And I mean, obviously, the idea that you're talking about comes from the Japanese theologian Kosuke Kiyama and his idea of the 3 mile an hour God. And so he's the way that it runs with him, he says, the average speed that a human being walks at is 3 miles per hour. So Jesus, who is God, walks at 3 miles per hour. God, who is love, walks at 3 miles per hour. Love has a speed, and it's a slow speed. And what he's pushing us to do is to recognize that if you're going to love somebody, then you need to slow down and take time with them and spend time in that sense. And it's very difficult to do that because the natural speed of healthcare is fast. And so I remember talking to somebody from Duke, actually, who's a physician, and we were talking about the 3 mile an hour God, and he said, well, this place makes me walk at 9 miles an hour minimum. And I said to him, well, if you're walking at 9 miles an hour and Jesus is walking at 3 miles an hour, so who's following who? It's a difficult challenge. But then I've been thinking it's an easy challenge to do that because obviously the system is oppressive. But then I did some work in Australia during the pandemic, just before the pandemic, on belonging and carer presence. One of the problems in care of the elderly was that people had tended to be absent from a situation. So they would be carrying out care with somebody with dementia, for example, but they'd be talking over them and they would or look into their phones. And eventually you have a culture of absence where things maybe get done badly, but people are absent. And I was been thinking about how do you avoid a culture of absence? Or how does my 9 mile an hour physician get out of that 9 mile an hour slot? Yeah. And so I was reading about this thing called micro breaks, right? Micro breaks occur when you step outside of a situation, just for 2 or 3 minutes, recalibrate and go back in. Because when you go back into that situation, you've had a different perspective. When you're in there, you're just lost in the midst of that. Exactly, but simply stepping out and stepping back gives you that space. And it's good for the mental health of the worker, and it's good for the carer. And it just struck me that there's something similar in that dynamic to what God talks about Sabbath. You know, when the people of Israel are oppressed and going through all this difficulty, Jesus says, take a break, think about me, remember me, and then you go back into your work. So it's like there's these little Sabbath moments that a professional or anybody can take just to step out and step out. That's the beginning of a movement towards a 3 mile an hour God.
Yeah. It makes me think. So I only recently learned anything about basketball this year, and I was over at our stadium, which people have many feelings about. But they have a hype room, which is a small space that they get into that has all of this. It's the architecture of excitement. It is motivational. It is small. It duplicates the theater of life that they will experience when they rush out there. So when you describe that, I want like the opposite of the hype room. I want the micro break room. I want the place designed to like not make me want to like run out yelling, "Are you ready for this?" It makes me want to like be like, "I'm not ready for this. I'm taking it down."
Exactly. I watched the Super Bowl last night. No idea what was going on.
When people can't tell the story of who they were, because we lose things all the time, you have some lovely advice from experiences of and friends of how to perhaps not always do the thing that at least I want to do, which is every time I've lost something, all I want to do is go back to the person that I was. I have like a stronger, better, faster, and it's never, at least for me, it's just genuinely not possible. But then it's hard to sort of grieve the limitations that I now have to live with. You had a lovely friend who gave herself a living funeral. Am I remembering that right?
Yes.
Can you tell me that story?
Yeah, Tonya. Yes, she was involved with a serious motor accident, and she ended up getting brain damage, which changed certain aspects of her personality. And sometimes quite straightforward things like she didn't like the clothes that she used to like, she didn't like the smell she was like. So the various things that made her a sense that she was alienated from herself. And obviously our friends felt similar. So the way that she coped with it was twofold. She went through therapy, and so she was able to kind of realign certain things in her life through therapy. But she recognized there was a significant rift between who she had been and who she was now. And so she got together with her pastor, and they decided to create this funeral service, which they called a living funeral, i.e. a way of grieving for somebody who's gone, but who also is still alive. And it's very beautiful, the imagery that she used. She said, I gathered my friends and family around, we went down beside a river, and she gave everybody a handful of rose petals. And what happened was that they told stories. So they would tell stories about how she had been, how she was, and just create this kind of narrative fabric, including her own story. And then they would tell stories of how she is now. Yeah. And so the schism between these two things had a narrative bridge. And then they, at a given time, they would put the rose petals into the water and watched them as they moved down and disappeared out of sight. And that was to symbolize her old life, so that they could come back in to this new life and readjust to the way that she was and see what that looked like.
I did something like that yesterday, entirely inspired by the, hey, shouldn't there be a ritual around letting something go? But I was moving out of my home where I had lived and almost died, and leaving it felt so odd because it had been like every cupboard moving was full of medical supplies, and every one room was like, this is where I would quietly give myself these needles and then go take my son out of his crib, but really be hiding my chemotherapy pack. And like there was just so many parts of it that were like such a heartbreaker. But it's also the home I brought my son home to, and the place where I used to play this awful video game called Rock Band, where you're giving people plastic instruments. And
I quite like that.
It was really fun, and there's no modern version, and I feel like we should bring it back. So I told my best friend Catherine, I'm never going to be that person again, and I don't want to skip it. So she drove me over. She's also an ordained pastor because Presbyterian. You guys are very,
there's the key.
You're good with your rituals. And she, all of a sudden, while we were driving over, she pulled very suddenly over to the side of the road, got out, took out a pair of bolt cutters, disappeared into the woods, came back with 2 enormous boughs of pine, just put them in the car, and then drove on as if this were Sunday. And we went into the house and she had a bucket of water and she's like, all right, let's do it. And we went room by room and told every hard, terrible story of the thing that had been.
Yeah.
And then and then blessed the person who we hoped would come after.
Yeah.
And then the person that we hope I might yet be.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it's like grieving the past person, I think, is such a lovely way of, and especially when someone else is there to tell the story of you. Because you're right, we don't remember.
No,
I mean, I only remembered half of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that kind of ritual is really important because it's like a bridge between the past and the present. And we should ritualize things more, I think.
Yeah.
Like, 'cause there's a lot of things. And I oftentimes think that in relation to something like dementia, that the movements through the different phases is really complicated and difficult. And ritualizing these movements could be really helpful for just getting you from one space to the next space.
Yeah.
It's complicated. So I think that's a great story. And do you feel better for it?
I do.
Yeah.
I do. I feel a bit wrung out. But I can't, I think it's hard to make room for a new story if I haven't had a minute to grieve the old one, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I would have kept it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
People, I just find it so much easier to on to the next if the next thing is always unambiguously good.
Yeah.
Fun, bigger, better. It's usually just different.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Do you think in creating new kinds of belonging, do you think it helped your friend then be able to find ways to bring old friends along with her and then be able to be like, and this is who I am now? Like it reinscribes belonging if we can grieve the past self?
It might do. It really depends on whether you like the people you used to like, and they like you, because there are changes.
That's right.
And so you can go through this, I mean, I have to speak to her, I don't know whether, but you can go through this process and discover that the old friends that you had are maybe not the friends that you want to have now. And that's another source of grief, but maybe that's just the process of moving on, that to be honest enough to recognize that some things that were are just not, Which, I mean, that's quite a difficult thing. Like, I mean, it's very difficult for friends and stuff, but I guess it's just part of that healing process, difficult as it is.
So whether you're someone who's suffering or someone who's around suffering, do you have any advice for people who want to create a deeper sense of belonging in those spaces?
In relation to suffering?
Yeah. I guess whether you're the person going through it or the person around the person going through it.
Yeah.
I always think that can often be one of the loneliest places to be.
Yeah, I think that's certainly right. I mean, for people going through suffering, it is a profoundly painful experience. Like, it's a profoundly alienating experience.
Yeah.
Because you lose a sense of the security of the way that life is.
Yeah.
In life, you recognize that the things that you used to use to cope with that are no longer available to you. So therefore, it's isolating. And if that's combined with pain, then you do have a difficulty, because pain is the enemy of community. Because it blocks you from yourself, it blocks you from your neighbour, it blocks you from God. And so you can find yourself in a horrible space. And the last thing you want is somebody to say, I know how you feel, because clearly you don't know how you feel, you don't even know who you are.
Do you really?
That's right. Yeah. So in that context, pain becomes, if you like, a spiritual issue. Jesus says the love of the sum of the law and the prophets is to love God, love neighbour and self. Pain can destroy all of that stuff, because you lose your sense of who God is, you lose your sense of who your neighbour is, and all you can feel is the pain within yourself. Yeah. And so in that context, you need medics, strangely enough, at a spiritual level, to give you medication that can reconnect you in that way. And so there is a kind of interesting collaboration between the medical and the spiritual in the context of suffering and deep pain. So I think that there's something important in there, that to be released from pain is to be released to reconnect with God, self and others. For people who are alongside people who are suffering, that can be equally as difficult and equally as alienating for various reasons, because you just have no control over that. And to watch somebody in that situation who is struggling, who is in pain, and to be able to do absolutely nothing is painful, and psychologically painful. And to accompany somebody in that is really, really stressful. Because in reality, very often, emotions transfer. So if you're with somebody who's really, really anxious, chances are you'll leave that, you'll feel yourself really, really anxious. If you're with somebody who's suffering and going through that anxiety and tension, you'll go away with that. So from the perspective of somebody who's walking alongside somebody who's suffering, you need to get rid of that. You need to have a friend, or you need to have somebody who you can really be honest with, who you really can lament with. I mean, one of the reasons why the lament psalms are so powerful is because they're so cathartic.
Yeah.
They just help they just get rid of that stuff. And you need that. You need somebody or some group of people that you can be honest with. And so I think from the church's perspective, reclaiming lamentation is profoundly important. Not just in the time of crisis, but we need to get into the habit of practicing laments. I mean, there's plenty of things in the world to lament about, so it's not like we have nothing to practice on. But for somebody in that situation of accompaniment, I think that's really, really important.
Yeah. John, you always give me new language for the withness feeling, the being alongside, suffering not as an aberration, incompleteness not as an aberration, but as part of that in the middle of it we are all somehow very deeply good, even if most of it is not affirmed by our culture as independent, perfect, in control. And I always walk away from a book, and now 2 chances to be with you, feeling like more of a person. So thank you so much for doing this with me. What a joy.
My pleasure.